But let's look at where we are in the world of politics, shall we? Let's have a bit of a roundup. Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator with Young Voices UK, joins me now. Good to have you with us, Portia. I hope you're having a Merry Christmas.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Happy Boxing Day.
Happy Boxing Day, indeed. Let's start with restrictions, actually, where we are today. So we have Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, all introducing tougher restrictions starting from today. Not the case in England.
Thankfully not, no. It will be interesting whether Boris buckles to pressure and introduces more restrictions in England. I think that's what people expect some point between now and the new year. But there doesn't really seem to be the support for it in the broader population. Like, people were wanting to have a normal Christmas as they could and really take more responsibility for themselves as weighing up what makes sense for them in their health situation. So hopefully that stays strong. And you look at the restrictions in Scotland or Wales, and it's not as though they've done much good. So they're back imposing more restrictions. So it's not exactly a strong precedent for us to follow.
Yeah, let's take a look at how likely or maybe unlikely it might be that Boris Johnson could introduce restrictions, because he had a very, very tough time in terms of getting his own party to support him to get Plan B through Parliament. So yeah, how likely is it, do you think, maybe he could get that support of Labour? Because if indeed he does want to go further, it looks like he would need Labour to push anything through.
Yeah, he would definitely need Labour, unless the Conservative Party at large has had a dramatic change of heart and mind over the Christmas break, which is highly unlikely. I think he'd see even more rebellion if he wanted more restrictions in place. But even Labour, they were like, I don't think they're as malleable to supporting all of the restrictions coming into place as Boris might hope. So my hope is that they stay strong and stand firm and oppose anything that's coming in, because otherwise it's another New Year's in lockdown. I think people at this point, they're boosted, or a lot are anyway. The data really does need to paint a picture other than what it's currently doing for the support to be there.
Because Boris Johnson, he just doesn't have the authority. If you look back to this time last year, when he was essentially just pushing through restriction after restriction, we went into tier 4 in London and some other parts of England, and then indeed, going into the new year, went into another tough lockdown. You couldn't see him doing something like that now, could you?
I sure hope not. And if it is, it shouldn't really be done in the top-heavy presidential style of announcing it at a press conference or to the media before Parliament. There should at least be votes on these things. And I think the toleration for such heavy-handedness is wearing thin very quickly.
All right, let's move on to the next story, shall we? The story which is on the front pages on, I think it was the Express, that really focused on the Queen's Christmas message yesterday. It was really, really personal, Portia. It was one of the few occasions where you could sit there, watch the Queen, watch Her Majesty, and actually relate to her.
That's
Do you know what I mean?
True. The Queen isn't really renowned for being terribly relatable, is she? Especially in terms of emotion. I think she did it very well. It was in a very British style of, it was a moving speech without being overly sentimental. So it was in a typical stiff upper lip, but also conveying the deep sense of loss and sense of love that she had for Prince Philip. I think anyone listening would struggle not exactly cry, because, not terribly British, but definitely feel somewhat empathetic towards Her Majesty.
Well, it was a really very different, you can imagine, even difficult Christmas for the Queen. Of course, the first without Prince Philip, also having to spend it at Windsor Castle instead of Sandringham because of COVID worries. So yeah, a very, very different Christmas day for her, and you did get the sense that this maybe would be tougher for her.
Sure. And I think it does communicate that everyone has faced different Christmases this year once again. Obviously, the Queen is something separate, and having to spend Christmas in Windsor Castle isn't the hardest of hardships. But it's the way life goes. There's never some things just aren't constant, and
No.
you have to adapt to change.
And then having to spend Christmas at Windsor, as you say, maybe not the hardest, not the toughest of places to spend Christmas, but yeah, having to spend Christmas at Windsor Castle and having to deal with an intruder. And this is the focus on most of the front pages rather than her actual Christmas message, but an armed intruder nearly breaking into Windsor Castle.
Yeah, so supposedly carrying a crossbow. There's not too many details about it, but he was stopped. I think it's not the first time someone's tried to break in.
No.
There was someone who broke into Buckingham Palace. I'm not so sure about Windsor Castle, but clearly the guards can do their job. And 19-year-old guy, who knows why he wanted to break in, but maybe one too many sherries into the day.
Yeah, details are still to come out. I'm not even sure who he is and his motives behind it all. And then looking ahead, pubs to stay open until 1 a.m. during the Platinum Jubilee in June.
Yes, so
I know you're excited about that, Portia.
I'm very excited. After the past almost 2 years of restrictions on what and when you can drink out in a pub, it would be nice to have a couple more hours, but somewhat disappointing. It's only for a weekend. It needs to be formally reviewed, which will apparently take a whole month, despite there being the precedent for such things in the past. But I'm sure it will be pushed through and no worries. And hopefully by June, people will be less cautious.
Well, I was going to say, can we even make these sort of plans? Can we even dare give people this hope that we might be able to get together for longer and celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee?
I think we have to at this point. Obviously, there can always be restrictions come in, which no one really wants, but you've just got to plough on through. And if you don't make plans now, then you're never going to. I think most people acknowledge COVID will be with us, so you might as well drink a little bit more and stay out at the pub a bit later.
You know, you say that, Portia, but I am tired of promises that people can't keep. You know, this time last year we were told we could have Christmas. That was just, brought to an end for many of us. And then this year we were really worried. And if it wasn't for Boris not having the backing of his own party, we could have actually seen him have to go back on that promise again. I just don't know how I feel about making that promise, making those plans, and then having to cancel them and change them last minute.
That's fair, especially when it comes to the pub. You don't want to be promised an extra few hours and then that taken away. But hopefully it will be the end of broken promises. A new year, new trustworthy and integrity coming from our Prime Minister. Maybe not, but there's always time for change.
We can always hope, isn't it, Portia? I need to ask you, how was your Christmas day in the end?
It was good, thank you. A few last-minute changes due to people testing positive for COVID. But
this is it. So even though things were opened up or we didn't have the restrictions we were dreading that could cancel Christmas, in the end, for some people, they did have to make changes because of either, somebody testing positive or someone having to isolate. The Queen even had to make some changes that Princess Anne couldn't attend.
Yeah, all in it together, I suppose.
What happened with you? How come, who was it that tested positive and how did that change your Christmas?
So we meant to go to Ireland, but due to not a close contact, but someone overlapped with COVID, people in Ireland a little bit more cautious, didn't want us to go. So tested negative anyway, but played it safe, stuck around in England, and it was lovely. So, it all works out in the end.
What did you do in the end?
In the end, ate a lot, drank a fair amount, watched the Queen's speech, and played Trivial Pursuit, which was surprisingly civil, as board games at Christmas go.
Oh, well, there were a few tears at our Christmas. My son ended up crying. He said we weren't giving him enough chances to get the answers right to the games that we played. Looking to the new year. We're talking about just worried potentially that Boris Johnson might introduce some restrictions going into 2022. Do you think you'll be doing anything for New Year's Eve? Have you made plans? Are you sitting and waiting?
We currently have a couple of plans. One a little bit more heavy going, a party in London, which if that still goes ahead, we'll be going to, and failing that with a few friends at a pub for dinner is the likely situation. But playing it safe, got a few backups just in case, be it Boris who imposes the restrictions or friends wanting to change plans.
Do you think he could?
I really hope he doesn't. I think he'd be misjudged at this point.
I mean, just looking at the figures, though, 122,000 new cases at the last data we got on Friday. But then saying that the deaths, we're not seeing a rise in number of people dying in all of this. However, you are seeing a slight rise in people going to hospital. I can't. Usually I can just have, a bit of a guess where we're going. I can't really guess whether Boris Johnson could introduce restrictions or not.
That's true. I think the pushback is that cases are rising, but most people are fine. The majority of people are double vaccinated, so many have taken up their booster. It's been a successful rollout. And can you really shut down the country, the economy, for what is not even as bad as the flu for most people? And cases in hospital, slight uptake and increase, but nothing too dramatic yet. And life has to be lived.
And actually, to be honest, I don't even know if he has the full backing of all his cabinet ministers. But Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator with Young Voices UK, good talking to you. Have yourself a lovely new year. You are